We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about what I do to catch bass when it's really cold and nasty out. A lot of guys think I'm crazy, but it works. We're going to talk all about it.
Oh, I missed him. Dadgummit. Did I? No, I got him. I got him. This one's better. This one's a lot better. Oh, this one's a lot better.
And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And as you can see, the frigid temperatures continue for South Mississippi. This oddly cold weather has been going on for more than a week now and is expected to continue for the foreseeable future. Right now, as I'm recording this, it's 38 degrees and the wind is blowing at about 10 to 15 miles an hour. Chilly conditions to be sure, but at least the sun is out. The last time I headed out to the water and did some fishing, it was a bit chillier than this, and we had that freezing, miserable rain that was blowing through with those heavier winds. Those conditions can be rough to go fishing in, to be sure. But I wanted to see if those bass were biting. I wanted to see what are the extremes that those bass will bite. And, well, as I was out there tying up a lure and sitting in my little boat, a gentleman drove up in his truck, rolled down his window, and he says, "Hey, what are you doing out there?" And I said, "I'm fishing." He said, "Fishing?" He shook his head and he said, "Man, you're nuts." He rolled up his window and he just kind of drove on. And he may have been more than a little bit right because, well, that was one of those days that it seemed like no matter how many layers you dressed in, that freezing rain just cut through everything and made everything miserable. And to top it all off, I forgot my gloves that day. So my hands were just red and frigid the entire time. It got to where tying on lures and changing out baits was getting to be quite a challenge. But moral of the story is, the fish were biting. I actually caught fish. And it's kind of interesting because that lets us know that even when the weather is worst, even when we don't think there's any fishing to be had, there's some good bites out there. And I was getting them. Obviously, I had to adjust my presentation. Now, what we've been talking about lately is, well, this little guy right here. This little head, this little jig head. It's got a 1/8 ounce weight on it, kind of like a bullet weight, but it's fixed onto this worm hook. And that is what I was using. I was using that because, well, a Ned rig doesn't do very well out in all that hydrilla. I don't care how weedless you make it, that mushroom head gets hung up on everything. And as we've talked about before, the presentations that I have been using, well, they've actually been pretty simple. You guys know that I was going with this Googan Kraken craw here. It's a smaller craw. It's got that green pumpkin color. I was going very natural because, well, I wasn't taking any chances and that water was exceptionally clear. And this is what I've been getting a lot of bites on. It's a great little bait. But I figured, you know what, with the weather the way it is, I may want to go with something even more subtle. So that's when I went out to a small little flipping bait that I like to use. And that is a Yum Woolly Buck. These little things right here, they don't look like much. They don't have a lot of movement or action in the water, what you would call a do-nothing bait. But they work exceptionally well. And whenever you're looking for that do-nothing presentation to entice those bass that, well, they're just as cold as we are whenever we're out there. And surprisingly, it worked. I was able to catch actually some pretty nice fish. It wasn't long before I had tied this little bait on and threaded it on this hook that, well, I caught this guy.
Okay, we have this little Yum beaver bait on here. Little flipping bait, little pitching bait. I'm going to work the bottom with it. I've got a 1/8 ounce, kind of like a Texas rig jig head. It's a worm hook that's got a little 1/8 ounce weight on it. I'm just going to give it a try. I want to see if those bass are maybe on the bottom a little bit more. sink, let it 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 sink. Alright. Well, I know the dinks are on the bottom. See if the bigger fish, let's see where they are at. Because the thing about bass is they generally group up. When they're grouped up, they're generally in the same age group, which makes them about the same size group. So if you're catching dinks out of an area, chances are that's all that's in that area is dinks. Okay. Oh, I missed him. Dadgummit. Did I? No, I got him. I got him. This one's better. This one's a lot better. Oh, this one's a lot better. When I set the hook, he was actually running at me. You are a lot better, buddy. Well, we found the fish, and we found the right tool for the job. That's a much better fish. He's pounding, not quite pound and a quarter, but he's pushing pound and a quarter. That's a much nicer fish. They are on the bottom. All right. Appreciate it, little dude. Hot dog.
So what am I doing with those? Well, I'm dragging them across the bottom ever so slowly, just edging them along. And whenever I feel them catch up on a piece of hydrilla, I pull it gently until it pops free, and then I let it sit. And that's what I've been doing, dragging it along, feeling it catch some vegetation, nudging it free. I'm not yanking it free. I'm nudging it free. I'm keeping constant pressure on it until I feel it come free, and then I let it sit. And that's how I'm getting my bites. And obviously, I'm using a spinning combo. I'm using this, which has got 10-pound braid. I'm using a 7-foot, either a medium or a medium light rod. This 10-pound braid, I've got to an 8-pound fluorocarbon or copoly leader. And that's how I'm getting my bites. Actually, I'm getting a lot more bites than I thought I would be getting. I've gotten quite a few. And while you can feel those bass play with it, it's very interesting type of bite. It's very curious, especially compared to how bass normally inhale their prey, right? We call them vacuum feeders, and they don't often nibble like, well, maybe a catfish or a bluegill or some other species would. Those bass, they hit it. But they weren't doing it the last couple of times because that cold water, that cold environment really has changed how they're approaching their bait. And like we said before, that strike window, that strike zone that they normally go out in, that they're willing to chase bait in, it has shrunk way down. And we need to keep that in mind. We need to pay attention to the environment and think about it from the bass's viewpoint. And whenever you do that, well, you can actually get quite a few bites. So even though I'm out there and it's freezing rain and I'm cold, I'm soaked to the bone, my hands are red and they're numb, but I was out there, I don't know, maybe 6 hours because I was catching fish. And I probably stayed out there a little bit too long because I'm telling you what, that chill lasted with me for the rest of the evening. But I was catching fish, so I was actually out on the water a lot longer than probably was necessary. And it's crazy because you think that perhaps with all that nastiness out there, with all that rain and with all that ice and with the water temperature rapidly falling way faster and way lower than these bass are accustomed to, that you would think that the bite would shut off. The only thing that I had to consider was, instead of thinking about them in suspending, going after them with a Waco rig or a jerkbait or something like that, a swim bait, something that's in the middle of the water column, I thought, well, these fish are going to have their bellies in the mud. That was the big thing. That's what determined my bait. I figured with the changing conditions, with everything getting cold and with the freezing rain blowing through, I knew the bass were still going to be in that same area. And I knew that I could get them to bite if I made a couple of adjustments. I did it before. I did it whenever the cold front first came through and I was able to catch fish. So I repeated the process. I dropped everything down to the bottom, and I used some bottom dragging techniques, and once again, they proved to be exceptionally effective. So instead of sitting at home watching TV or football when you really want to be bass fishing, I'm telling you, try it on a nasty day whenever the wind is howling and the rain is and it's cold outside. I'm telling you, you can really get some nice bites. And if they will bite on a day like that, then they will bite on any number of different days. So there's always bites to be had. We just need to go to the lake. We need to target the bass how they want to be targeted, right? Find the life, you find the bass, and fish on their terms. You do those things, and even in the absolute worst conditions, even when you've got other people looking at you like you're some kind of nut, you can still go out and catch a great big pile of fish. So there you have it. Even when conditions are at their absolute worst, if you're willing to go out and try it, you can get some bites. You can get some really nice bass. So if they're biting when the weather is really terrible, then they're going to bite when the weather is much better. It doesn't really matter about the cold. Bass are always willing to bite something. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.